Welcome to our deep dive today, all about getting to know Franz Joseph Haydn. You know, he's called the father of the symphony and all, but today we're going way beyond just, you know, titles and stuff. We're gonna trace his journey, from like a simple village boy to like this musical giant.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating journey, and it kind of mirrors the way music itself changed
Yeah.
during Haydn's lifetime. I mean, think about it. He starts in this world where like rich patrons control everything,
Yeah.
and then bam, public concerts explode, audiences want something new, and Haydn's right there, right in that wave.
So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Like we know he was born in this tiny village, Rohrau in Austria. What was his childhood like? I mean, was he like, one of those kids where it's obvious right away this kid's going to be a musician?
Well, I mean, his family wasn't rich, not at all. His father was a wheelwright. But here's the thing, they were all like super musical.
Mm-hmm.
Evenings were for singing folk tunes together, like a family band, but none of them had any formal training. It's wild. It's like Haydn just absorbed music from the air.
That must have been a huge influence for sure. I mean, I read that young Haydn's talent was so obvious that he got sent away for training, right? But those early apprenticeships, they sound kind of brutal, to be honest.
Yeah.
How did he even make it through?
Oh man, imagine being sent away from home super young, first to Hamburg and then Vienna to sing in this like prestigious choir at St. Stephen's Cathedral. I mean, those were amazing opportunities for sure. But the sources really highlight how tough it was, like going hungry a lot, not having decent clothes. It must have taken like crazy drive to stick with it.
Yeah, I hadn't realized it was really that bad. There's even that story, right, about him basically singing for his supper, like trying to get invited to perform for these wealthy patrons just to get some refreshments. I mean, that's wild.
Totally.
Yeah.
It really shows how ambitious he was, even as a kid. Like, music was it for him. No matter the cost, he was determined. But then there's this other turning point. What happens when the choir boy's voice finally breaks?
Oh, yeah, that's right. He gets dismissed from St. Stephen's, and all of a sudden, he's in this super competitive world of freelance music in Vienna. So what did he do? Did he just, like, take any gig he could get?
I mean, yeah, he definitely had to hustle to survive.
Yeah.
Teaching, performing on the streets, the whole nine yards. But the key here is how disciplined he was. He didn't just scrape by. He started studying like crazy, right?
Yeah.
He's devouring works by composers like C.P.E. Bach, just immersing himself in counterpoint.
Counterpoint. Okay, for those of us who aren't like, music theory experts, could you quickly explain what that is?
Sure. So think of it this way. It's like the art of weaving different melodies together, right? But they're all independent and they're happening at the same time. And you create this really rich sound. It's super complex. And the fact that Haydn mastered it just shows how dedicated he was to building this rock solid foundation.
So he's not just like playing the music. He's really taking it apart, understanding how it works at its core. And speaking of understanding, you mentioned C.P.E. Bach. So why was he so important to Haydn?
Well, okay, so C.P.E. Bach, he was the son of the super famous Johann Sebastian Bach.
Right.
And he was already kind of pushing musical boundaries, like moving away from that strictness of the Baroque period towards something more expressive, more emotional. And Haydn just totally admired that. There's even a quote where he's like, "Whoever really knows my work will see how much I owe to Emmanuel Bach. I studied him diligently. I understood him." Like he saw a kindred spirit, someone who wasn't afraid to break the mold.
That's a great point. It sounds like these really tough years in Vienna, they didn't break him. They kind of like forged him, made him into the musician he became. But everyone needs a bit of luck, right? And for Haydn, that luck came with the Esterházy family. That's where everything changes.
Absolutely. So it's 1761, and he gets this amazing job. Kapellmeister for the Esterházys, one of the richest, most powerful families in all of Austria. I mean, just imagine being in charge of all the music for their court. That's a huge deal. And it's steady work, a job he held for almost 30 years.
30 years. Whoa, that's a long time. But what was it actually like working for them? I mean, it seems kind of isolated, right? Stuck out in the countryside, away from all the action in Vienna.
It was. Yeah, their estates were huge and pretty far from the music scene in Vienna. I mean, some people called it a gilded cage. But here's the thing. That isolation, that's actually what sparked Haydn's creativity.
Really? I would have thought it would do the opposite. Like, how did that work?
Because he wasn't constantly bombarded by the latest trends. He was free to just experiment. find his own voice. And that's exactly when he earns those father of titles.
Mm-hmm.
He's composing symphonies, string quartets, concertos, all kinds of stuff, and he's developing his own unique sound.
So instead of being stifled, he's actually thriving. That's so cool. But they weren't the only ones shaping his music, right? What about that story with the baritone, that weird instrument Prince Nicholas was obsessed with?
Ah, yes. The baritone. Oh, it's this strange instrument, like a viola da gamba, but bigger, with all these extra strings, and they like resonate when you play. It creates this really haunting sound. Prince Nicholas loved it. And Haydn, dedicated Kapellmeister that he was, composed like over 125 trios for it.
Wow. So he's pleasing his patron, but he's also getting to experiment with all these different sounds and forms. It seems like he was always juggling these two worlds, the demands of the Esterházys, but also, his own creative drive. Things do change for him, though, eventually, right? There's a shift in his contract that opens up a whole new chapter for his career.
You got it. So 1779 rolls around, and Haydn's finally allowed to sell his music outside of the Esterházy court, and boom, his fame explodes. I mean, his music is spreading all over Europe, people going crazy for it. He's like the hottest composer around. It's like going from local celebrity to like international superstar.
So all those years, working in relative obscurity, just honing his craft, it finally pays off big time. But we can't forget those legendary trips to London, right? I mean, those weren't just concerts, those were events. What was it about Haydn that just like captivated London audiences?
Okay, picture this. In 1791, Haydn arrives in London, and the city goes wild. I mean, people are desperate to hear his music. One account even describes the audience as being electrified by him. He was like the rock star of the 18th century.
I bet those visits were amazing for him, especially after, those years kind of isolated at the Esterházy court.
Yeah.
And it's during this time that he connects with some other major composers, right? Mozart, Beethoven.
Oh, for sure. His connection with Mozart was especially cool. He's got these two musical geniuses who just like totally got each other, respected each other's work. They even played music together sometimes. Can you imagine being a fly on the wall for those jam sessions?
I can't even. And then there's Beethoven, who actually he studied under Haydn for a while, but I've heard that wasn't always easy. Like they had totally different personalities and different ideas about music, right?
Very true. I mean, Beethoven was a bit of a rebel even as a young student, always pushing the boundaries of the classical era. And Haydn, while innovative, was still, more rooted in the elegance of his time. But their relationship, even with its ups and downs, is just so interesting. It's this like snapshot of how music was changing.
It's amazing to think that Haydn was right in the middle of this musical revolution, being influenced by some of the greatest musical minds ever. But even with all this international fame, he never forgot where he came from. And even in his later years, when he was having some health issues, he's still creating these masterpieces. And he's got this like really fascinating personality.
Totally. And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover about the man behind the music. His deep faith, his surprising business skills, even his mischievous sense of humor. It all comes together to paint this incredible portrait of a true musical giant.
Yeah, it's really incredible how he stayed so grounded,
Yeah.
even with all that success. So let's talk about those later years. I mean, we know he was still composing these amazing works like The Creation, The Seasons, but you mentioned his faith, right? Was that a direct influence on his music?
Absolutely. Haydn was a devout Catholic, and you can really hear it, especially in those late works. Like The Creation, right? It's an oratorio. So it's basically like a musical telling of the biblical creation story.
Okay.
And it's full of these huge choruses and these soaring melodies that just capture this feeling of awe and wonder, of creation itself. And then you've got The Seasons, which is also an oratorio, but this one focuses on the cycle of nature, like the changing seasons, the beauty of the natural world. And both of these works, they're just so deeply spiritual, and they really showcase Haydn's incredible skill at writing for these large ensembles and vocal soloists.
So he's tackling these really epic themes, but at the same time, you also mentioned he had this like really sharp business sense, which, I mean, it seems kind of an unusual combination. Was he really that practical when it came to money?
He was. It might seem surprising, but yeah. Haydn was very aware of his worth, and he knew how to negotiate. I mean, remember, he came from nothing, right? So he understood the importance of financial security. There's even one source that describes him as being, pretty sharp in his dealings. Like, he made sure he was getting paid fairly for his work.
Wow, so we've got a musical genius, a devout Catholic, and a shrewd businessman. It sounds like he was a man of many contradictions.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so fascinating. He wasn't just, this one-dimensional figure. He was complex.
Yeah.
He had this multifaceted personality. And I think all those different sides of him, they come through in his music. It adds this depth and richness to his compositions.
It's amazing that he was able to manage all of those things, especially as he got older and started to face some health problems. Didn't he have something pretty serious toward the end?
He did. Yeah, sadly. The sources mention these debilitating symptoms like weakness, dizziness, swollen legs. Most likely it was something called arteriosclerosis, which back then was a very serious condition. It's really remarkable that he kept composing even with all that going on. It shows incredible dedication to his art.
It's like music was his lifeblood.
Yeah.
And speaking of his legacy, I mean, we talk about his innovations, his impact on composers like Mozart and Beethoven, but what was it about Haydn's music that was so revolutionary? What set it apart from everything that came before?
Well, Haydn didn't just write beautiful music. He basically redefined the rules of composition. Like take the Symphony, for example. Before Haydn, it was pretty straightforward, kind of lighthearted, but he transformed it into this grand, complex, emotionally powerful art form. He expanded the orchestra, added new instruments, experimented with harmonies and structure. It's like he took the symphony and injected it with drama, with wit, with this whole new level of sophistication.
So he was like laying the foundation for what we now consider the classical style, like establishing these conventions that composers would follow for generations.
Exactly. And those conventions, they weren't just, arbitrary. They were based on a deep understanding of music theory, of how melodies and harmonies work together to create this satisfying listening experience. He just had this natural ability to structure his music so that it was both intellectually stimulating and emotionally resonant.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so enduring.
And that influence goes beyond the symphony too, right? I mean, he's also known as the father of the string quartet. So what did he do for that genre?
Well, he took the string quartet, which started as a more informal kind of music making, almost like a conversation, right? And he elevated to this whole new level of artistry. He explored the unique sounds that you can get from those four instruments, the two violins, viola, and cello, to create these intricate interplays of melody and harmony. It's both intimate and profound. He basically established the string quartet as this serious art form capable of expressing all kinds of emotions and ideas.
It's amazing how his influence just like ripples through music history. I mean, we can even hear it in the music we listen to today, but we've been focusing mainly on the compositions, right? What about the man himself? You mentioned his humor before. Did that come through in his music at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. Haydn had this mischievous side that often pops up in his music. He loved to surprise his audience, play with their expectations. You'll find these moments, right? Unexpected pauses, sudden shifts in volume, these playful melodies that almost like wink at the listener. He even wrote a symphony called The Surprise because of this super loud chord that it just interrupts this quiet, peaceful passage.
Oh, I love that. It sounds like he had a real sense of fun, and he wasn't afraid to break the rules a little.
Exactly. He was able to balance the seriousness with this lightheartedness,
Yeah.
to create music that was both intellectually stimulating and emotionally engaging. And there's this great anecdote that really captures that. It takes place during the 1809 bombing of Vienna.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that. What happened?
Okay, so picture this. Vienna is under attack, right?
Oh.
Bombs are falling, everyone's terrified. And here's Haydn in his late 70s, already pretty frail from illness. And he's calmly reassuring everyone around him. He's like, don't be afraid, children. Where Haydn is, no harm can reach you.
That's classic Haydn, that blend of faith and humor and maybe even a bit of self-awareness. It makes him just so relatable even centuries later. It's like we've uncovered the facts, the milestones, but there's still this mystery, these unanswered questions that make you want to listen to his music with fresh ears.
And maybe, just maybe, we can catch a glimpse of the man himself hidden in those melodies. There's always something more to discover with Haydn.
I totally agree. So we've explored his humble beginnings, his rise to fame, this groundbreaking music, and this really complex personality. But before we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out to you as we think about Haydn's legacy?
For me, it's his resilience. This is a man who faced like hardship after hardship, poverty, isolation, and he never lost sight of his passion for music. He turned every obstacle into an opportunity to grow, to keep pushing boundaries. His story is a testament to hard work and self-belief and just this relentless pursuit of your dreams.
Yeah, it is inspiring to see, how he took those tough times and turned them into something amazing.
Totally. And it's a good reminder, right, that innovation doesn't always come easy. Sometimes you need those constraints, those limitations. They force you to think outside the box. Like look at those years with the Esterházys, right? He was basically composing for one very specific audience, and yet that's when some of his most groundbreaking music was created.
Yeah, it's like he had to figure out how to keep himself and his patron entertained, and in doing that, he stumbled onto something totally new.
Exactly. And he never stopped experimenting, pushing those boundaries even further. Like think about how he made the orchestra bigger, added instruments, played around with harmonies and form. He was always exploring, always trying to see what music could do.
It's no wonder he's considered one of the most important composers ever. I mean, you can hear his influence everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Every time you hear a symphony orchestra, every time you get swept away by a string quartet, you're hearing echoes of Haydn's genius. He built the foundation,
Yeah.
Set the standards, and then inspired generations of composers after him.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm left feeling just really impressed, not just by his music, but by the kind of person he was, that mix of resilience and innovation and faith and even humor. It's all there right in the music.
And honestly, the best way to honor that legacy is to just keep listening.
Yeah.
Explore all that amazing music he wrote and let yourself be swept away by the beauty and just the pure ingenuity of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So to our listeners, the next time you hear some Haydn, the symphony or a string quartet, whatever, take a minute to appreciate the man behind the music, the village boy who became this musical giant, the innovator who shaped classical music, and this resilient spirit who reminds us that even when things are tough, creativity can still thrive.